This failed actor built a $6.5 billion real estate empire, and he'll tell you he's not even in the real estate business. His first day of selling was back in September 15th, 2008, back when Lehman Brothers filed for bankruptcy. And his first year, he made only $9,000. And his edge isn't actually his sales training or his market knowledge. It's that he spent 2 years being rejected to his face because of his face. As a theater kid trying to make it in New York, that rejection actually became his armor. Now, if you only know Ryan Serhant from reality TV, $1 Million Listing, Owning Manhattan, you might think it's a strange topic to talk about. However, I've gone through over 70 hours of his interviews, his podcasts, his talks, and read all 3 of his books. And what struck me is the thing that made me want to make this episode. And it's exactly how he describes what he does. He says, we are a media company that sells real estate. And that's his entire thesis. Not better at selling, better at being seen. And he's inverted the model that other brokerages use. And once you understand that, everything else makes perfect sense. The content, the personal brand, the willingness to fly to Shanghai on 18 hours notice to chase a deal. The guy who says, my only plan B is me. So what I've done is I stripped away everything that wasn't exactly how Ryan Serhant works, not his biography, not the big TV drama, not the celebrity clients. So I'm going to go through all 46 principles organized by importance and not chronologically. By the end, it will be impossible to not understand how this guy operates. And these principles apply whether you're in real estate, sales, media, development, capital, or anything where attention determines who wins. So let's get into it. So let's start with the central insight. This is the thing that makes Ryan different from every other real estate agent in the world. He says, what is our value proposition? We can put properties in front of more qualified buyers globally, organically, than any other firm combined. We're either a real estate company that uses media and technology, or we are a media and technology company that just so happens to sell real estate. So I want you to think about that. He's not saying he's better at selling. He's saying he's better at being seen. When he started his own brokerage back in 2020, in the middle of the pandemic, he, quote, says, hey, Ryan started a real estate company. And his thought was, no one cares. How would I differentiate myself from the legacy firms? His answer was to invert the entire business model. And he describes his company as an upside down pyramid, and studios starts at the top. Content creates leads, leads create deals, deals create more content, and round and round and round. And he's now got a Netflix show that drops to over 300 million people. And he says, our lead flow is organic. We don't buy revenue. This is the exact same playbook that Oprah used to build her company. Build the media empire first, and the product comes second. And this same playbook actually comes from P.T. Barnum, the legendary showman and businessman of the Ringling Brothers and the Barnum and Bailey Circus. He understood over 150 years ago that attention is the business. And Gary Vee says the same exact thing. Document, don't create. Jab, 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 right hook. The principle is very simple. Build the audience first. The business model reveals itself second. Now, here's how he thinks about the brand. And this is a maxim that he repeats constantly. So you're going to want to write this one down. Brand is reputation. Your brand is what people say about you when you leave the room. That's it. That's the definition. Not your logo, not your marketing. What people say when you're not there. And he says, quote, you can't create a logo and say it's luxury. If the product is shit, the brand is shit. And so what this means, and he explains the difference between advertising and PR. Advertising is push, PR is pull. And the business comes from pull. And his formula is this: core identity leads to perception. Perception leads to reputation, and reputation becomes the brand. And he describes it as a pot of boiling water. And over time, the water eventually boils. So he didn't plan the brand. He did the work, and then the brand emerged. And this is actually something that the founder of Under Armour, Kevin Plank, says. A brand is not a product, it's an idea. And this is someone who's built a billion-dollar brand on conviction and storytelling behind this simple idea of the warrior's mentality of grit and perseverance. He built a simple moisture-wicking shirt to solve his own problem as an athlete, and he launched this with only $20,000 in his savings and $40,000 in credit card debt. And he was selling this to teams and equipment managers instead of individual consumers. And he got his big break when Under Armour appeared on Any Given Sunday. And this is actually very similar to Phil Knight, the founder of Nike. He spent over 40 years building the brand before it meant anything around the idea of just do it. And this came from their famous 1988 campaign, Just Do It. And basically it boils down to take action despite fear or doubt. But Phil focused on the audience of athletes first, but then later he expanded to say, if you have a body, you can be an athlete. So the modern day Nike actually decided to move further away from big names like Michael Jordan to more everyday runners. So something you're going to want to keep in mind, your brand isn't what you claim, it's what you consistently do. And here's the thing, you already have a brand, but the question is whether you're controlling it or not. So now going to this next idea, I want to tell you a story because Ryan just said brand is reputation and his story is his reputation. This is what the principle above and beyond actually looks like. So Ryan has his client named Wing, which is a pseudonym. Wing puts down $1.8 million deposit on an apartment in New York. And then Wing goes completely silent. He stops returning Ryan's calls. He stops responding to emails. And the deal is about to die. Most agents would have written it off. But what Ryan does is flies to Shanghai. He gets there on a Tuesday. And the meeting with Wing is set for the next day. And that night, he actually goes to this club called the M Club with one of Wing's associates, this guy named Tony Chow. And Tony got massively drunk. And this club closes, and Tony wants to drive home. Ryan actually goes with him, and Tony blows through every red light on a bridge. And he gets to his house on the golf course, and he completely passes out. Now, Ryan is stranded. He's in the clothes he wore on the airplane, and he's on a golf course in Pudong, and his phone is dead. He doesn't know how to get out. He doesn't know if Tony is ever going to wake up. And with or without him, he's got to meet Wing in the morning, and because he needs to get his money back. And then, out of nowhere, his Ferrari phone rings. He'd forgotten about his fake Ferrari flip phone that he bought on Shanghai's street market. His partner, Scott, is actually on the other line, and Scott had told him that the hotel receptionist said, "You have to help me. My boyfriend was kidnapped at the M Club." And so Ryan was able to flag down a taxi and hand the phone to the driver, and the hotel receptionist was able to give him directions, and he was able to get back, shower, and make the meeting on time. The moment he walks into Wing's office, guess who opens the door? Tony Chow, clean as a whistle, like nothing happened. Ryan then left the office with the contracts and the checks, and they close. Now, here's what Ryan actually has to say about this story. That's my reputation. That actually is my brand. My brand is my reputation. Your ability to go above and beyond for your clients in a way that everybody else won't, that's your reputation. And your reputation will grow as the person who works harder than the next person. Now, this is the same thing that Estee Lauder did. She personally delivered products to customers' homes, working the counters until her 80s, long after she could have delegated everything. And this actually mirrors Serhant's personality, where he's still selling properties and showing up on camera when he runs an entire brokerage. both understood that the founder staying on the front line isn't just nostalgia or ego. It's the brand promise made visible. And we actually see this pretty often throughout founders like Sam Walton, the founder of Walmart. He visited stores until weeks before his death and slept in his truck to check on locations. Conrad Hilton walked into every single hotel, adjusting every crooked lampshade himself. So your brand is whatever you do when it's easier not to. And that Ferrari flip phone didn't save the deal. It's the willingness to be in Shanghai in the first place that did. Now, here's where things get interesting, because here's how Ryan thinks about what he's actually selling. And here's a quote from him. When you're selling a house, what are you selling? You're not selling the walls, not the garage. You're selling the story. And then he says something that I love. I don't even think I'm that great of a salesperson. What I am is a storyteller. And he's not describing rooms and videos, he's narrating futures. And he has a quote saying, imagine your kids running down this hallway. That's not a hallway, that's a childhood memory. That house is just a skeleton. The story is what they're buying. And this is very common throughout founders. Walt Disney understood this, and he said, we don't make movies, we make magic. I never called my work art. It's part of show business, the business of building entertainment. Entertainment, such as our business, provides a necessity, not a luxury. If we lose the detail, we lose it all. And Howard Schultz from Starbucks also says, we're not selling coffee, we're selling the third place between home and work. So the principle here is pretty simple. People don't buy features, they buy benefits. They buy the story of who they'll become. Now, this next one is one of his rules that I think applies to everybody. He has a great quote. People don't know what you sell if you don't tell them what you sell. Now, this sounds obvious, but he says there's a confusion between bragging and being confident in your abilities to help people. And here's how he threads the needle. I don't give myself my own trophy. I talk about my business because I'm excited about the wins my clients get. The subtlety here is very important. He's passionate about the results, not his own achievement or self-congratulations. His point is no one cares about your successes more than you do. Some people have to know about them. And going back to founder earlier, P.T. Barnum, he said, without promotion, something terrible happened. Nothing. And S.A. Lauder handled out free samples on the street. She never hid what she sold. So the principle here that you're going to want to write down is visibility isn't vanity, it's the prerequisite for opportunity. Now, this next idea is a counterintuitive genius. Ryan started making YouTube videos about luxury real estate, but here's the thing. Billionaires didn't used to watch YouTube. Their kids did. And he has a great quote around this. I started targeting wealthy kids on YouTube because the kids watch YouTube. Parents didn't. 11-year-old girl saw that video, showed it to her mom, and they bought a $13 million house. Now, I want you to think about that. He's not marketing to billionaires directly. He's marketing to billionaires' kids. And he describes this as the circle of trust. And he has a quote, it's the kids, the assistants, the business managers, the cousin, the lawyers, all in the circle of trust, forwarding and sharing. And there's a famous legendary copywriter and advertising executive behind Quaker Oats and actually the Pepsodent Smile, Claude Hopkins. And the Pepsodent Smile is actually what helped drive toothpaste use from a small minority of the population to a widespread daily habit throughout the United States. And what Claude Hopkins understood is indirect persuasion 100 years ago. And he wrote a book on this called The Science of Advertising, which is a super good book. I recommend reading it. And it goes over one of his most fundamental principles, the reasons why advertising, on why should I buy this. It's not about slogans, it's not about the hype, but the benefits that you actually feel. And Again, Walt Disney, one of the most famous founders, marketed to kids, knowing parents would follow what the kids wanted. So your customer might not actually be your audience. So you can reach your customer through who influences them, and that can be your audience. Now, this next idea goes into how he thinks about the math around the content. So he has a great quote: all of the business that I've received that's inbound from people who don't know me, where I've been able to create a relationship with while I sleep, because I'm engaging through platforms in a way that compounds over and over, outweighs any deal I could have done if I had been the quiet traditional broker. And so that's the key insight. Traditional marketing is one-to-one, time-bound, it doesn't scale. Content is one-to-many. It's perpetual and it compounds. He noticed early that the game was changing, and he has a quote for this: it wasn't necessarily the one who sold the most that was getting the most listings or building the biggest business. It was the one who had the most attention that got the most business. And this is very similar to Naval Ravikant that says there's 4 C's of leverage, aka getting more output with less input: code, capital, collaboration, also known as people, and content. And those are permissionless leverage, meaning they don't require more of you to get more out. And Warren Buffett actually applies this idea to compounding leverage with capital the same way that Ryan applies it to reputation with content. So every post is actually a salesperson who works 24/7 and never quits. Now, here's the practical application of this idea. How much time does he actually spend on his content? And he has a quote saying, I focus about 1 hour a day on content. It could be 15 minutes in the morning, 15 minutes around lunch, and half an hour at the end of the day. So I want you to notice it's not 6 hours, it's not all day, it's 1 hour, because he's running a $6.5 billion brokerage and content is integrated. It's not separate. But here's the key. He has a quote saying, I always want to make sure that I'm doing 2 things. I'm posting with purpose, and I always post with purpose. And 2, there's a clear call to action. And he has a quote that follows this up. He says, I see so many people creating content left and right with no clear call to action. I don't even know what you're doing. Are you just trying to get followers? There's so many people to follow now. Why should I follow you? Content without strategy is noise. Every piece should answer, why should someone care? Random content gets random results. Purpose creates profit. And this goes similarly into the father of modern advertising, David Ogilvy, and he's actually the guy behind Rolls-Royce's famous ad. At 60 miles an hour, the loudest noise in the Rolls-Royce comes from the electric clock. And he founded a now multi-billion-dollar ad agency, which has worked with the biggest brands like American Express and is often regarded as the #1 ad agency in the world. And he said, every ad must sell. This means no vanity content. And Claude Hopkins, another famous copywriter, also built a trackable, purposeful advertising using custom coupon codes for each individual ad to see which one gets the best results. So where this all kind of ties together is consistency beats volume. 1 hour a day beats 8 hours a month, because 1 hour a day is 30 hours a month. So making content with purpose is how you create real results. And that's the entire thesis. That's what makes him different. Now, let's talk about why he operates this way and the fuel that actually is behind the machine. So that's the thesis. He's a media company that sells real estate. Now, I want to explain why he operates this way and the psychology behind the machine. Ryan is actually very honest about what drives him, and it's not pretty. He has a quote that says, I'm driven by revenge for sure, 100%. Success is the best revenge. Now, let me tell you what he means by that. He grew up moving around a lot. He was born in Texas, And he grew up outside of Boston, and he describes young Ryan as a chubby, acne-covered person, and he was unhappy with himself. And he says the theater kids were far more approving of me, and they would take me in, whereas the sports kids weren't. So you've got an overweight kid with bad skin, the new kid, and this theater kid in sports towns. And he talks about having middle school, high school, college shit on my shoulders. He has self-esteem issues, which he later turned into overeating issues, which then made him feel bad about himself. And then later, actually, in his first real estate firm in New York, he describes it as full of bullies that took me 3 years to get out of. So he's still running from gatekeepers. And this is actually the same fuel as Michael Jordan. He didn't just remember, he kept names. His famous Hall of Fame speech is the iconic example of this. Most athletes use that moment to be gracious. Jordan used it to settle scores. He called out all of his high school coaches who cut him. He called out his competitors. He essentially said, "You doubted me. Look what I built." He used perceived disrespect as rocket fuel. And Kobe Bryant actually did very similar. He said, the most powerful thing you can do is take negativity and transform it. So this principle is simple. The question isn't whether your motivation is noble. Negative fuel can be good fuel when used correctly, when the fuel is powerful enough and pointed in the right direction. So this next idea describes what actually drives him day to day, and he has a quote for this. It's not that I want to be first, it's that I can't bear being last. And that's a very important distinction. He's not running towards something, he's running away from something. And he has a quote that follows this up. The fear of losing hurts a lot worse than the pain of winning. A lot of CEOs and a lot of major athletes, they all have this disease where they hate losing more than they like winning. And I definitely feel the same way. And he calls it a disease because he owns it. And he talks about being in New York City, sitting on the subway after his debit card just got declined for like a $3 yogurt at the grocery store. And he says, I got up frustrated, tears in my eyes, like, fuck this place. And he has another quote around this. I will run as far away from that moment as I possibly can. And this is the same exact thing that many founders that we study follow as well. Larry Ellison, the founder of Oracle, says the same thing. The chip on the shoulder that never goes away. Larry was actually adopted, raised in a modest Chicago neighborhood, dropped out of college, and worked odd jobs before founding the multi-billion-dollar company of Oracle. He never fit the conventional mold of success, and he knew it. The awareness of being an outsider, of not having the right credentials or background, actually created a permanent need to prove himself that never healed. It shows up in his famous line, "It is not sufficient that I succeed. Everybody else must fail." And that chip didn't soften with billions of dollars. It actually calcified into leadership and built on dominance and not coexistence. And many of the best founders that we study have a chip that drives them. For Ryan, he grew up overweight, introverted, moving 8 times before 4th grade, always the new kid, never sure where he fit in. And his early motivation in real estate was disarmingly simple. I just wanted to be liked. But instead of channeling that insecurity into Ellison-style aggression, Serhant turned it into performance and visibility, acting, reality TV, social media, building a personal brand so loud he could never be ignored or dismissed again. He gamifies the old wound, converting the need to prove himself into systems and habits rather than letting it stay raw resentment. So running from something can be more powerful than running to something. So this next idea is one of actually Ryan's signature lines. So you'll hear this constantly. My only plan B is me. And he says, there is no plan B. There is no Serhant 2. It all has to work. And then he follows that up with saying, you have to put your back up against the wall if you want to see what you're truly capable of. Now, think about when he launched his brokerage back in September of 2020 in the middle of the pandemic. He left a major firm to start his own company, and he named it after himself, Serhant, his name on the building. And he says, there's no backing out when your name's on the building. This is exactly like the famous Cortez burning the ships in Mexico. Elon Musk actually walked away from the PayPal sale with roughly $180 million, and he put every single dollar back into SpaceX, Tesla, and Solar City. By 2008, both SpaceX and Tesla were weeks away from bankruptcy. Musk was literally borrowing money for rent while deciding whether to put his last dollar into one company and let the others die, or split it and risk losing both. And he split it. SpaceX's fourth launch succeeded. Tesla's financing closed Christmas Eve, and he survived, but only barely. And Sam Walton, the founder of Walmart, actually mortgaged everything he had for his first store. So this principle, you're going to want to save. Your safety net might actually be preventing access to your full potential. So I mentioned this in the intro, but I want to go deeper. This is a great quote from Ryan. My first day in real estate was the day Lehman Brothers filed for bankruptcy, September 15th, 2008. And the global financial system was collapsing. Real estate was at ground zero. And this is the day that Ryan decides to become a real estate agent. But here's how he thinks about it. The market being tough didn't affect me because I had no money anyway. I made $9,000 my first year, and that was still good. And he says, I credit my pure ignorance as a big part of what we've done. And while everyone else was panicking about what they lost, he had nothing to lose. Estee Lauder actually started her cosmetics business during the Great Depression, and Disney was founded during the 1920s recession. And Brian Chesky and Joe Gebbia, the founders of Airbnb, couldn't make rent on their San Francisco apartment. So when a design conference sold out every hotel in the city, they threw air mattresses on their living room floor and charged strangers $80 a night to sleep there. When investors wouldn't take strangers sleeping in your home seriously, they kept the company alive by designing and selling limited edition Obama O's and Captain McCain cereal boxes during the 2008 election, raising $30,000 and catching the attention of Paul Graham's Y Combinator. That desperation turned into a platform now worth tens of billions of dollars with millions of listings in nearly 200 countries. Later in the spring of 2020, they actually dealt with an even worse headwind. Airbnb's bookings dropped 80% in weeks. They laid off a quarter of the company, and they faced real questions about survival. But they pivoted hard into what still worked: domestic trips, drivable getaways, and long-term work from home anywhere stays, and whole homes in less dense areas. So by December 2020, they went public at a valuation that stunned the market, turning an existential crisis into a comeback story. So there's a pattern throughout all of these greatest founders. Difficult markets clear out weak competition. For Ryan, his 2008 was only the setup for the day he started Serhant in 2020. When New York real estate froze in 2020, Serhant didn't hunker down. He left his firm after 12 years and launched Serhant, a brokerage built around content, media, and his personal brand, rather than the traditional open house model. He folded his training courses, film studios, and social media followings into a single content-to-commerce ecosystem where agents' reach drive listings and deal flow. Despite opening during lockdowns, the firm grew to over 1,000 agents across more than a dozen states, proof that he bet correctly on a media-first brokerage for the 2020s. So your worst conditions might just be your biggest advantage. Now, this next idea is the title of one of his books, and it's a concept that he talks about constantly. And here's his quote: "Big money energy is the unstoppable confidence of someone who knows who they are, knows what they want, and isn't afraid to go and get it." And he describes watching successful people when he first started out. And here's his quote: "They could walk into a room and make perfect eye contact, a great handshake, and they ooze success, whether they are successful or not." So here's the key. And he watched them and thought, I saw everybody else had this energy. They owned the room. In my mind, I'm a failed actor. I just got into real estate and I need to pay rent. That's not me. I can't do that. Maybe in 10, 20 years. And he also says, I didn't think success was something that was possible for me. A lot of people end up feeling that way. You kind of write off your future and say, well, that's never going to happen to me. But then he made a decision. I chose success first, career second. So what does this mean? And he has a quote: "I didn't have the experience, but I knew I had to be confident in a room, even if I didn't feel confident." And so what he did is he literally manufactured confidence before he had any reason to have it. And the energy came first. The results followed. And this is very similar to Conrad Hilton, who says, think big, act big, dream big. Conrad Hilton went to Texas after World War to buy a bank, but the deal fell through. So he bought a crowded little hotel in Cisco instead, noticing that the lobby was overflowing with guests who had nowhere to stay from that single roadside property. He nearly lost everything 3 times during the Great Depression, but he refused bankruptcy because he believed his dream was bigger than the crisis. He went from a desert trading post in territorial New Mexico to owning the Waldorf Astoria, titling chapters of his autobiography, "The Sky is the Limit and Horizons Unlimited." His rule, be big, think big, act big, dream big, wasn't advice he gave after succeeding. It was the operating principle that got him through when nothing else supported his vision. So just like Ryan, you don't get big money energy from big money. Big money comes from big money energy. So this is one of my favorite things that he says. They never tell you that the feeling of bravery is disguised as fear. Everything is scary. The fear I'm feeling is just the evolution, not yet figuring out how to create the feeling of bravery. So think about that. Fear and bravery feel like the same. The only difference is what you do next. And he makes this observation about modern life. And he says, I don't think there's a fear of failure anymore. I think people used to have a fear of failure when they actually cared more about what they thought of themselves versus other people thought of them. And Winston Churchill said, a fear is a reaction, courage is a decision. And so in May 1940, Winston Churchill became the prime minister as Nazi Germany was overrunning Western Europe. France was failing, Britain stood alone, and his own cabinet was pushing for negotiating peace with Hitler. Churchill made a decision, no negotiation, no surrender, Britain fights on. His wartime speeches acknowledged the terror openly, blood, toil, tears, and sweat, but reframed fear as the starting point, not the conclusion. So if you're waiting to not feel scared, you'll wait forever. And so Ryan actually goes deeper on this, and he has a quote, I don't think anyone cares about failure anymore, but being embarrassed, no one wants that. And he also says, people are making decisions for their entire life, their entire family, because they're afraid of being embarrassed. And then he actually gives you the antidote. Embarrassment isn't real. It's completely internalized. There's nothing for you, just like worrying. There's nothing for you. So here's the key insight, and here's his quote. The same people that you're afraid of also aren't thinking about you as nearly as much as you think about them thinking about you. And so Sarah Blakely, the founder of Spanx, her father actually celebrated failures at dinner. He had asked his kids, "What'd you fail at this week?" Thomas Edison said, "I've not failed. I've found 10,000 ways that won't work." Even James Dyson, who built one of the most recognizable brands today to nearly $9 billion in revenue, failed 5,127 times before he finally built what is known today as the world's first bagless vacuum. So here's the principle that you're going to want to write down. No one is paying as much attention to you as you think. And so this kind of follows up with the previous principles. And this principle, he says, he wants to pass on to his daughter. And here's his quote. "If I could only share one principle around money with my daughter, scared money don't make money." And he explains this a little bit further. If you're scared of money, you will not be able to make money. You'll forever be a slave to rent, a slave to the dollar. And he continues this saying, "Money is a resource. The minute you're afraid of money, the minute you're afraid of anything, that thing wins. It's always you versus the thing." And he's not reckless. He actually says, "I don't ever want her to be afraid of it. I don't ever want her to be obsessed with it either." But he also says something a little deliberate here. "I've always pushed myself into financial corners to force myself to become future me a lot faster." And we can see this pretty prevalent. His current payroll is $2.2 million a month. And when he bought his first apartment, his budget was $1.5 million. He actually bought one for $3.7 million. So he deliberately creates financial pressure to force growth. But he still has that same memory from earlier saying, "I have that PTSD of running out of money in New York City, sitting on the subway train, leaving the grocery store after my credit card had been declined." And this goes exactly into what we mentioned earlier about Elon Musk betting every single dollar he had on Tesla and SpaceX, or Sam Walton mortgaging his house to purchase his first store. And even Richard Branson bet everything on Virgin Atlantic. So the principle you're going to want to save is the fear of losing money is often more expensive than losing money. So this next idea is a confession and not advice. And here's his quote. "I'm not going to be happy in a nice 3-bedroom house with a fence and a car and vacations. That's an awesome life for so many people. I envy those people, but I'm not okay with being okay." So I want you to notice he says he envies people who are satisfied. He wishes he could be, but he knows he can't. He compares himself to a mountain climber. And here's his quote. "Why would you do that? You can go around, but you can climb because you have to." And then he also says, "There's no such thing as enough. Enough is just another word for average. This isn't advice. This isn't self-knowledge. He knows what you need. Don't pretend otherwise." Even Jeff Bezos kept a sign on his office door that says "Day One" for decades. It's actually shorthand for operating like a startup, staying customer obsessed, and refusing to let process replace thinking. And actually in his 2016 shareholder letter, someone asked him, "What does day 2 look like?" And he answered, "Day 2 is stasis, followed by irrelevance, followed by excruciating, painful decline, followed by death." And his point is that the moment you start protecting what you've built instead of reinventing it, decline has already begun. You can't just see it yet. So for Jeff Bezos, day 1 isn't motivation, it's survival. And Kobe Bryant has a quote that says, "Rest at the end, not in the middle." Some people climb mountains because they're just there, but some people can't not climb. So you need to know which one you are. So that's the fuel, that's the psychology. Now I want to get into exactly how he executes every day in his operating system. So now we get into how he executes the daily frameworks, the time management, and this is his entire operating system that we're going to dive into. So this is one of the things that Ryan is most famous for. It's how he thinks about time, and it completely changed how I think about my own day. And he has a great quote. "You have approximately 1,000 productive minutes in a day. I wake up as the CEO of my own bank of time. I got 1,000 fresh dollars a day. And so 1,000 minutes, that's a budget. And actually, here's how he protects it. Someone would be mad for 10 minutes, and I'd say, you ruined my day. Now I'm throwing out $999 because you took $10 of it. And if you think about that and reframe it, a bad phone call isn't a failed day. It's 5 minutes out of 1,000, and you still have 995 left. And he says, if someone screams at me for 3 minutes because a deal just died, that 3 minutes, I'm not going to throw away the rest of the 997 minutes. And so he actually scales his thinking, saying, I don't just have 1,000 minutes, I have 70 people there, and I have 70,000 minutes a day, plus my own to be productive. And he actually extends this to the year. You don't work in the year, you work in those 4,000 hours. I allocate a certain amount of hours to each goal. So while most people think in years, Ryan thinks in hours. And he has a quote, looking at a single year as an entire year is pretty limiting. But if I look at each year as 4,000 hours to make a difference, 4,000 hours I can break down, associate to my goals that I can actually control it. And so he actually schedules himself in 15-minute increments, and he calculates meeting costs. And he has a quote, I have 10 people in this meeting. This meeting is costing me $11,000. And so Elon Musk actually acts very similarly. He schedules his entire day in 5-minute blocks, treating his time as his most constrained resource, even when he has unlimited money. So at Tesla and SpaceX, he's actually told his employees to walk out of meetings the moment they stop adding value rather than sitting there politely while their minutes drain away. And his logic is very simple. You can always make more money. You can never make more time. And actually, Cal Newport wrote an entire book on this, on time blocking. But Ryan's framing is the most useful thing that I've heard around time. And this is the principle that you're going to want to save. Every minute upset about the last meeting is a minute stolen from the next opportunity. And so now let's actually dive into when Ryan's day actually begins. And he has a quote, my day starts the night before. Otherwise, you wake up scattered. You look at the calendar. What do I have today? And by then, your day has already begun and you're late to the race. So he wakes up at 4 a.m., but by then, there are no decisions to make, just execution. And he has a quote, a key to success in my day starts the night before. So last night, I prepped for today. Now I wake up super early. I'm super tired, but I know exactly what I have to do today, and I'm ready. And then he actually does something clever. He says, I send out some emails so that when other people wake up, they're like, oh man, Ryan's already on top of it. He beat me to it. And Benjamin Franklin has famously said, by failing to prepare, you're preparing to fail. And Jocko Willink also has a quote for this, discipline equals freedom. And so I actually spoke with Sean Cahan, the president of a multi-billion-dollar mortgage bank. And one of the biggest things he attributes to winning his day is winning his morning. As a husband, a father, and a founder, he wakes up at 3 to 4 a.m. and he has nearly had an entire day before everyone else wakes up. And he can only do that by having a great nighttime routine and getting to bed early. And so Serhant is ruthless about his time and wasted potential. And this is why he treats his night and his morning like an athlete. He realizes as a CEO, a founder, he needs to stay at the top of his game to perform at a high level. And that's why this principle is summed up by win the morning by winning the night before. And so this actually dives into his daily structure. 3 activities every single day. And he has a quote for this. Every day you find business, you keep business, and you do business. And then you go to sleep, wake up, rinse, and repeat. And he time blocks it actually. From 8 to 10, I find business. From 10 to 12, I keep business. And from 12 to 5, I go and do. My calendar would literally be 1,000 minutes. And then let's say from 8 to 10 a.m., so that's 120 minutes, that's finder time. And then from 10:30 to 1:30, could be keeper time, and then from 2 to 7 could be doer time. So there's 3 hats every day. CEO, finding new business, COO, keeping existing clients happy, and CFO, doing the actual work. All three must happen every single day. And Andy Grove from Intel was obsessive about time allocation. Andy actually ran Intel by asking one important question: what is the highest leverage use of my time? And he treated his calendar like a factory floor, identifying the limiting step in any process, scheduling everything else around protecting it. So his principle was that time is the single most important resource a manager allocates. And if you don't proactively schedule high leverage activities, you'll spend your day reacting to everyone else's priorities. So Ryan's Finder Keeper Doer system is essentially Andy Grove's production model applied to a sales career. 3 critical outputs that must be in the calendar every day, not left to chance. And Peter Drucker said, what gets measured gets managed. And so to kind of sum up this idea and principle, the day you stop finding is the day you start dying. And so this next idea is how he fights complacency. And he has a quote: I have a group chat called Page One. Every day is page 1 of the book. If you were brand new today, what would you do? And then he calls out the pattern he sees. When you first got in, you called 15 people. Now you're waiting on referrals. Drop the ego, go back to the basics. So the group chat makes social accountability not just a personal discipline. Every day, what would hungry you do? So this is the same philosophy that we went over earlier of Jeff Bezos' day 1 philosophy. Jeff Bezos says day 2 is stasis, followed by irrelevance, followed by death. And Sam Walton knew this, and this is why he visited stores until his 70s. Always looking for ideas, never assuming he'd figured it out, and he always wanted to stay close to the customer. And so this principle could be summed up by saying the basics never stop working, you just stop doing them. And so here's how he thinks about identity. Here's his quote: when you can't change your circumstances, there's one thing you can change: your energy. And he follows this up by saying, I started writing down who I wanted to be 2 years from now. My role model is that guy, me 2 years from now, and I work for that person. And he takes us even further. 70-year-old Ryan is my boss. That's who I work for. When he auditioned for $1 Million Listing, he had 18 months of experience. He didn't lie about his track record. He projected the energy of inevitable success. And this is very similar to Arnold Schwarzenegger, who won Mr. Olympia in his mind before he ever stood on stage. And he would visualize himself holding the trophy, hearing the crowd, feeling the win, and then train as if that outcome had already locked in. And he actually has a quote saying, creating a vision so clear that your present day actions become inevitable. And this visualization isn't just motivation and rah-rah. It was an identity. It wasn't training to maybe win. He was training because he has already won, and his body just needed to catch up to what his mind already knew. And so he took action towards his identity. Ryan did actually the same thing. Ryan paid for a driver even when he couldn't really afford one. But it allowed him to elevate his business. And that driver freed up time for calls, follow-ups, and content, turning dead commute hours into production time. And that present Ryan spending money to live in the schedule and environment of future Ryan. So competence creates confidence, and confidence creates circumstances for credentials. And so this segues nicely into his theater training, and he has a great quote saying, being a salesman is really an improv game every day. You're meeting strangers. It's a new scenario. And then he gives this example. Your scenario is the house is on fire and you want to get to Mars. Okay, great. Let's put that deal together. So never say no, never block, never tell a client something is impossible. Just figure out how. And Thomas Edison said, there's always a way to do it better. Find it. And Edison tested thousands of filaments before finding the one that worked for the light bulb. He didn't see failure as rejection. He saw it as experiments, and he saw it as iteration in his lab in Menlo Park. It was an invention factory built on one premise. If something doesn't work, there's always a way to try. And that's the same mindset that Ryan brings to deals. When a client says the house is on fire and they want to get to Mars, the job isn't to explain why it's impossible. It's to figure out how to structure it. And Edison never blocked. Ryan never blocks. So every sales conversation is a scene you've never rehearsed. So your job is never to block. And here's what makes theatrical rejection different. Here's a quote. You're getting rejected to your face because of your face. And he explains this. 2 years later in New York City with no money, scrounging dollars, being rejected to my face because of my face as a real estate agent. If someone didn't want to buy an apartment, it wasn't because of the size of my nose. So think about that. Here's another quote. Getting rejected to your face about your face is pretty rough. And I did that every day for 2 years. And he follows this up by saying, if you don't get a role, it's about your face, your hair, my hair color, your nose, your chemistry. In real estate, it wasn't about my nose. It was about the apartment. And so 82% of new real estate agents quit within their first year. Ryan had already survived something harder. And there's another layer deeper to this. And he quotes, I didn't have to be Ryan. I got to be Ryan, the real estate agent. Ryan, the guy that knew what he was doing, that had all the confidence, that was the character I was allowed to play. And so this is actually very familiar with a lot of founders. J.K. Rowling was a broke single mother battling depression when she finished Harry Potter. And then 12 publishers told her no. And Bloomsbury only said yes because the chairman's 8-year-old read the first chapter and demanded to know what happened next. So the gatekeepers who rejected her weren't wrong about the market. They were wrong about that book for that moment. And now she's a billionaire author thanks to Harry Potter, which is an insanely rare accomplishment for authors to reach this level of success. And Ryan faced his own version of this 3 years at a firm full of bullies, rejection after rejection before $1 million listing. But he kept finding, because the day you stop is the day you start dying. So here's the principle. Your past failures aren't just scars, they're armor. And kind of continuing this theater thread, he's actually very explicit about what's transferred from theater. And he has a quote, I spent most of my life in theater. I could memorize information really quickly, so I can remember them. Improv is what I do all day, which is a yes and. You're meeting strangers, it's a new scenario. Okay, your scenario is what? And so he has a few more insights about acting. When you're an actor, you can't be internal on your own spotlight. Otherwise, it's gross and it's fake. You're listening to people and responding to them. That is sales. And he actually has a trick for when he doesn't know the answer. If anyone ever asks me a question I don't know the answer to, I'm just going to start talking about stuff I do know, just like a politician. So this kind of ties into principle. Steve Jobs dropped out of Reed College, but he kept dropping in on classes that interested him, including a calligraphy course taught by a Trappist monk, where he learned all about serif and sans serif typefaces, letter spacing, and what makes typography beautiful. He called it fascinating, but he saw zero practical application at the time. A decade later, he insisted that the Macintosh have multiple typefaces, proportionally spaced fonts, making it the first computer with beautiful typography, a design choice that has shaped every personal computer since, which is where the famous quote, you can't connect the dots looking forward, you can only connect the dots looking backwards. And so Ryan's theater training works the same way. Memorization, improv, listening, responding instead of performing, skills that seemed irrelevant to real estate until they became his entire edge. And that's where this idea comes from. Your unusual skills from a previous life might just be your edge. And so this next idea is a non-negotiable for him. And he has a quote, "I respond to every lead within an hour. Most agents take 24 to 48 hours. By then, they've already talked to 3 other people, and he makes it a hiring requirement. You respond in an hour. And if you can't work here. Go work somewhere else that doesn't care about that stuff." And he continues this saying, "Speed to lead above all else. There are so many companies that get started with great ideas, great people, and they're just too slow. Slow in terms of social engagement, response time, slow on emails, slow in recruiting, slow in promoting, slow across the board." And he continues this saying, "Do not let perfect be the enemy of good. Speed to lead, be quick." And Jeff Bezos lives by this idea. He actually says, "Speed matters in business. Many decisions are reversible." And Bezos actually built Amazon on the one-way and two-way door model, where most decisions are two-way doors, which means they're reversible, they're low stakes. So you should make them fast and adjust later rather than wait for the perfect information. And he calls it bias for action. And he considers slow decision making one of the biggest killers of good companies. And so the logic is simple. If you can walk back through the door, speed beats thinking every time. And so Ryan applies this to leads, but also to every part of his business. Responding in an hour instead of 24 is a two-way door. You can always refine your pitch later, but you can't get back the client who had already talked to 3 other agents while you're crafting the perfect response. So fast and imperfect beats slow and perfect. And so this one is pretty interesting. This is actually how he thinks about downtime. And he has a quote, "Real estate is seasonal, but I don't take time off in December like everyone else does. That's when I'm setting up Q1. And he continues this saying, "The last 2 weeks of August are actually historically the slowest for business. And I love taking this downtime and putting it to use for future me going into the fall." And he also extends his thinking in years into the future. And he says, "I prepare now for the buyers of tomorrow, people who are going to be buying real estate in the next 10 years. And so this goes into exactly how many of the greatest founders think. They think in years and decades. And Warren Buffett, his quote, "Be greedy when others are fearful," is a famous quote, but few people actually understand the principle around this. It's that he studied for years and decades leading up to the market cycles so that when the opportunities came, he was able to act fast without fear. And Ryan actually did the same thing with his business back in 2020 when real estate in New York came to a stop. Ryan could have lived in fear, but instead he decided now is the time to act and start Serhant, regardless of any doubts or fears that he had. So the best time to plant a tree was 20 years ago. The second best time is when your competitors are resting, or today. And so that's the operating system. That's how he structures his time. Now I want to talk about how he actually sells, the machine behind the deals. Now we're going to dive into how he actually sells in his sales philosophies and principles and how those become application. This is Ryan's actual core definition of selling, and it flips the entire paradigm. So what is selling? Selling is a transfer of enthusiasm and confidence. People hire confidence. They don't hire desperation. And he's very clear about this in another quote. "Anyone can show a house, but few people can hire confidence." And so this is the core definition of selling to Ryan, and it flips the entire paradigm. And he has a quote, "What is selling? Selling is the transfer of enthusiasm and confidence. And people hire confidence. They don't hire desperation." And he's very clear about this. He says, "Anyone can show a house, but people hire confidence." And then he explains what he's exactly doing. "I don't sell homes ever. I don't think I've ever actually sold a home. The homes that I sell are the skeleton around the excitement that I transfer to people. My enthusiasm for a home is really what I'm selling. So I want you to think about that. He's not selling a house. He's selling his energy about the house. And he says, it's very hard for me to negotiate with someone's wallet, but I can negotiate with someone's emotions. And here's the image he uses to explain this. What's oozing out of your pores? If what's oozing out is desperation, people don't hire desperation. And so he describes watching successful salespeople earlier in his career saying, they walked into the room like they already won. And this was their second time coming here. Like they already had the master's jacket. They already had the green jackets at home. So how do you act confident when you're not? And he has an answer for this. You memorize the information, you study the information, and you know what you're talking about. And then you can always fall back on facts. And he actually dives deeper into this by saying, selling isn't, come on, just do this. Selling is assuring, walking people through options so they can pick the best one, an option they would have picked anyway, but with you. And he also says, you're going to buy a house anyway, so I'm going to show you homes that I think are great. Let's imagine you living here, your baby's footsteps here, your dinner parties. That's excitement. And that's when people open their wallet. And even though Steve Jobs had a reality distortion field, it was genuine enthusiasm, not manipulation. And David Ogilvy, the famous copywriter, said, you cannot bore people into buying your product. And S.A. Lauder also said, I never sold, I just offered samples and let the product speak. And so desperation repels, confidence attracts. You're not selling a product, you're selling your energy. And so this next idea dives into how he positions himself with clients. He has a quote, I tell all my clients, I don't work for you. I don't work for them. I work for the deal. Without the deal, we should just be friends. And then he makes this alternately clear by saying, if you want a broker who's going to say yes to you all day, every day, tell you how beautiful your house is, there's 80,000 agents in New York City. There's a lot of them who'll say yes to death. And he says, I'm not emotionally attached to real estate. I'm emotionally attached to the deals. And so this removes any negative dynamic instantly. He's not on one side or the other. He's the facilitator whose loyalty is to the transaction getting done. And Charlie Munger has a quote saying, show me the incentive and I'll show you the outcome. So when you work for the deal, everyone wins or everyone walks. And so this next system is exactly how he stays connected with clients. And he has a quote, follow up, follow through, follow back. The most critical steps in any business transaction. And he actually breaks this down even further. Follow up is with everybody from either yesterday or the next week. Hey, you said you were going to do this. Hey, this is happening. Hey, just want to touch base. Follow through is doing what you say you're going to do. And my dad taught me, you're only as good as your word. And follow back, which is really important. Every day, I follow back with past clients I sold things to 10 years ago, people I met last week who aren't even interested. And then he points out in another quote, follow up is free. That's the thing. We're in the service business. Everybody's in the service business. So it's all free. It's just, I'm going to have a phone, email, and calendar anyway. So follow up after initial contact, follow through during the process, and follow back after it's done. And the founder of the famous CAA creative agency, one of the most powerful agencies in the world, Michael Ovitz, says, follow up was the key to everything. You didn't even have to be smart. You had to have good follow-up. If you followed up, it gave you an extra point on the smart side of the scale. And so Ovitz built the most powerful talent agency in Hollywood history on this simple principle of follow-up. And not on talent acquisition, but on follow-up systems, because nobody likes to be ignored. And Ryan is relentless at follow-up because he realizes in relationships, staying in touch long-term is literally everything, just like Ovitz. It's why Serhant built a team to help support this. And this kind of ties down the principle. Most people do one, good people do two, great people do all three. So follow up, follow back, and follow through. Now I want to tell you another story because Ryan just explained the 3 F's, and this story is the proof. And he has a quote, "I will follow up with you until you die. That is literally what I do." So there's this guy, he sends Ryan a BBM message. Remember BBM? And he gives him an address in Paris. And Ryan says, "I'm not in Paris. I'm in New York City. I have no plans to go to Paris whatsoever. And I have no money to get there." But he says, "So I scrapped together some savings and figured out how to get to Paris, literally in 18 hours by flying Aer Lingus to Dublin and Ryanair from Dublin to Paris." And so he gets there, he goes to the location, which turns out to be a bar, and this guy doesn't show up for hours. And he has a quote, 1 a.m., he shows up with a line of people, and what he really cared about was getting me drunk. He just wanted to watch me drink. I drank a significant amount of tequila, and he sort of looked at the papers a little bit, and I got him to sign 2 things. And then I went back to New York City very sick. And so then this guy disappears off the face of the earth again. And months later, Ryan has a quote. He randomly says, "I'm in New York City. I'd like to close. It's 11:30 a.m. You can't just get a closing together, but fine, we'll figure it out." And so what happens is kind of crazy. He has a quote. He comes down with like 15 people. This fleet of black Escalades pulls up outside the Mandarin Oriental, completely tinted out. The minute that happens, I text my mom and I say goodbye. And he has a quote. He's like, no. We go to JFK. So we went to JFK. We went to the back of JFK. We pulled up. There's this big 747, and he got inside and he bought it. He got in the back of the car, and then we got back into the city, and he signs the papers and he closes. So who is this guy? And he has another quote. Turns out he prints about $1 billion a month, wealthier than Gaddafi, and he just wasn't concerned with this little apartment. And here's why Ryan got the deal. And he has a quote. "The only reason he moved forward was because he thought it was super amusing to watch me persistently follow up. The fact that I actually went to Paris and he knew it was bullshit. He knew I wasn't going to be in Paris. Is one of the reasons he went through with it." And so the result, since then, we've done like $300 million together, and just as a way to diversify and move money around. And Ryan makes and lands this point home. Every single person in this room has lost deals because they stopped following up. It is my #1 secret sauce, and I will not even hire agents who can't follow up with me forever before I have ever had a second meeting with them. And so let me break this down into math on one deal. And this started with an $830,000 deposit with Ryan and months of silence. One desperate BBM bluff, $400 and scrapped together airfare, one night of tequila and confusion, more months of silence, and one surreal moment where a billionaire buys a 747 and then closes an apartment. The result? $300 million in lifetime business. He didn't know he was following up with someone worth billions. He was just following up, and that's the point. Estee Lauder, who we've talked about a lot, kept customer index cards for 50 years. She followed up on every single one. Colonel Sanders drove across America, slept in his car, pitched his chicken recipe to 1,009 people before the first yes. So that $300 million relationship started with a BBM bluff and a Ryanair flight. You don't know which follow-up is the one that changes everything. So you have to do all of them. And so this is how he thinks about luck. He has a great quote. "I want to work so hard that I make luck easy to find me. If you look at all of my deals, it's a ton of luck. But you don't know that on that one, I had to follow up for 5 years." And he gives another example of this. "I've since sold that 5-year guy a place in the Hamptons for $73 million, Miami for $33 million, London for $60 million. And so that's $166 million in deals, all because I followed up." And then there's this one as well. And he has a quote. "There's a deal I'm doing today that I have followed back with them ever since I rented their daughter an apartment in 2010, 10 years ago, for only $2,200 a month, just with the parents, just touching base, following up, happy holidays. I never really dealt with them before, but I knew that one day maybe they'd want to buy a place. 10 years later, future Ryan is super excited, and I'm happy to sell them an apartment for $12 million. I want you to kind of think about that and the math. On the first 5-year deal, 5 years times 52 weeks times one touch point equals 260 contacts before the lucky call. And Thomas Edison says, the opportunity is missed by most people because it is dressed in overalls and looks like work. So to explain this principle, luck isn't found, it's earned through relentless persistence. And so this next idea is his reputation. And he has a quote, I'm pretty authentic about my brutal honesty. The things you think are funny are not funny to other people, but I tell people the truth. And he tells this story, is a quote. It's always kind of been a thing for me. If you've watched $1 Million Listing for a long time, there were definitely haters out there for me. And I remember my mom saying to me, Ryan, you need to be careful with the things that you say, because the things that you think are funny are not funny to other people. But honestly, I tell people the truth. And he's explicit about it. And he says, first and foremost is just brutal, transparent honesty. Like, you have to be honest. And he explains the trade-off of this. I'd rather be honest to lose the deal than lie and win a client that I have to babysit forever. And his reasoning is the truth is just more fun. Think about how much work it is to lie. How much work is it to keep a story going and to keep an imitation going and just to lie to yourself. Lying actually creates a second job in maintaining that lie. And he has another quote on this. Babysitting a client you oversold is the real cost. Truth is efficient, lies are expensive. And so we see this with Ray Dalio, the founder of Bridgewater, one of the largest hedge funds in the world, on radical transparency. And Steve Jobs actually also says, A players want honest feedback. So clients don't need you to be nice, they need you to be right. And so this next idea, if you remember the Shanghai story from earlier, I actually skipped a detail, and here's a quote from Ryan. I literally started to try to learn Chinese. I don't even know Greek, and my wife is Greek. My baby's Greek. My mother-in-law is Greek, and I've never, for them, ever tried to learn Greek. But for Wing, I literally tried to learn Chinese. And he actually laughs about this in another quote. I'd be willing to learn Greek for your family. It's pretty awesome. That's pretty nuts. This absurdity is the point. He'll learn Mandarin for a client, but he won't learn Greek for his wife. And the effort becomes the signal. The language doesn't really matter. The commitment does. And we can see this pretty often. Sam Walton, the founder of Walmart, learned Portuguese to visit Brazilian stores. Howard Schultz went to Italy to understand espresso culture. So the principle here is the effort itself becomes the story. And so this next idea is his formula for meeting anyone, and he uses the 2 C's. You give them a compliment that disarms them, and that gives them trust. Saying something like amazing dress, great hair, love that X, Y, or Z, and then you find something in common. And he actually learned this in Improv, and he has a quote. The way you meet a client is you follow the 2 C's. You disarm someone and build trust with a quick compliment. Nice watch. Where'd you get it? Solid shirt. Did you iron or press it? Nice haircut. And then you find something in common. And then he gives an example of this when he was in a store and he saw a pregnant woman, and he was like, oh, pregnant women love compliments. And he said, you look great. And then he said, oh, what do we have in common? And he's like, oh, you look like you need a new bedroom. And that's the formula in action. Compliment disarms, common ground connects. And Dale Carnegie actually says, a person's name is the sweetest sound. And Benjamin Franklin said, a drop of honey catches more flies. So the simple formula repeated daily that beats complex. So simple formulas repeated daily beat complex strategies used occasionally. And so this next idea is actually a complete mindset aversion. And here's his quote: "Sales is way too hard if you don't switch your mindset to understand that your job is to fail and the bonus is to win. And once you can click that, then it's awesome. Then you don't have Sunday scaries, you have Friday scaries because you're stressed out that people won't respond to you over the weekends." So if you think about that, it's a complete inversion. If failure is your job, every rejection is actually doing your job well. And then Friday scaries, being scared that the weekend will slow you down, that's the mindset flip. And Thomas Edison has a quote saying, "I have not failed. I have found 10,000 ways that won't work." And this is very similar to what we talked about earlier with James Dyson, who made 5,127 failed prototypes before the vacuum worked. So the principle that you're going to want to save is expect failure, treat success as the bonus. And so that's his sales philosophy, and that's how he closes. Now, let's talk about how he thinks about scale and building beyond yourself. And so now I want to talk about how he kind of built beyond himself, from the team, the hiring, the expansion, and this is how he thinks about scale. And so this first idea is his philosophy on people, and he has a quote: "Hire fast, fire faster, promote fastest." Most companies are slow to hire, slow to fire, slow to promote, and he's decided to flip all three. And he has a quote: "We'd hire and fire as quickly as we can." And then he explains the promote fastest part. "The gratitude angle on the end is important because you always want to make sure you're putting your best people on your best opportunities and not just your biggest problems." And here's what he looks for. He has a quote: "I hire first and foremost for intelligence. If I have someone who's incredibly smart in front of me, even if they don't have the resume, if they don't have the backing, and if they don't have the experience, they're just going to figure it out." And he's learned also what not to hire for. He has a quote: "I used to hire people for experience. I just hated it because every meeting I would go to would be talking about what they used to do. It's like someone who's been divorced 3 times and every conversation is about an ex-wife. It's like the guy, move on, talk about the future." And his formula actually has a quote for: "I hire for function, I hire for raw intelligence, and I hire outside the industry." And actually, Reed Hastings, the founder of Netflix, built on this very similar principle of talent density. Small teams of only exceptional people with one brutal rule. And here's a quote: "Adequate performance gets a generous severance package." And his managers actually apply this through the keeper test before every review. And they say, would you fight to keep this person if they wanted to leave? If not, you pay them well and let them go, because a few stunning colleagues massively outperform larger teams of average performers. And so Ryan actually runs the same playbook. He hires for raw intelligence over experience, which cut fast when it's not working and put your best people on your best opportunities instead of using them to clean up your biggest messes. And so this principle can be summed up by saying speed in people decisions is a competitive advantage. And so this is how he thinks about the 2 types of people that he needs in his business. Brand horses open doors you can't open. These are demographics, geography, networks, whereas workhorses grind when it's hard. And most teams have all one type. So he intentionally recruits both. And when he's interviewing, he tests for what he calls the 3 E's. And he says, I test for energy, empathy, and enthusiasm. And he has a quote for enthusiasm: tell me about the greatest day of your life. And if they're like, the day my kid was born, and then pure silence, that's going to be a tough one. And then for empathy, he has a quote: tell me about the worst day of your life. And I don't need you to cry, but if you say, the day I didn't get into Harvard, I actually don't know if that's the worst day of your life. And now I don't know if you're telling me the truth. And so his summary is that education, I can teach anybody. That age-old adage, you hire for character, you teach for skill. And so Phil Knight, the founder of Nike, is exactly like this as well. He had charismatic connectors who could sign athletes and open doors into new sports and demographics like a Michael Jordan and Tiger Woods. The relationships with college coaches that made Nike credible in basketball and track. But behind them were obsessive operators and product people grinding on shoe design, factory management, and supply chain, and what Nike's culture called burns on seats in the van. And so this is what Nike's culture called bums on seats in the vans, running clinics and making sure the product actually shipped and worked. And so Ryan runs the same model. Brand horses take him into locations and demographics he couldn't reach alone, and then workhorses are there at 6 a.m. making sure the deal actually closes. And so some people need to open doors, some people need to walk through them, and you need both. And so this next idea is actually his self-awareness about what he's actually good at and what he's not. And he has a great quote saying, "I'm a much better broker than I am a CEO, and I know that about myself." And then he continues this quote with, "I really have to do what I do best, and everything else has to be done by other people or systems. I sell still like it's in my blood. It's what I do. I brand and I expand, and those are the key things." And he's very explicit about his weaknesses as well. And he says, "I surround myself with people who honestly are way better than me at what they do specifically." And this is what he's saying. "Everyone who comes here kind of scares me a little bit. There's no executive meeting I have where I'm just steamrolling. I'm scared because I don't have the IP that they do. And that's why they're here." And he uses this analogy. You need magnets facing opposite directions. If you have two magnets facing the same direction, they're just never going to work. You want to assemble an NFL team, you don't need 7 quarterbacks. And so this kind of follows Warren Buffett's principle that he calls the circle of competence. And it's the small set things that you truly understand where you should go very big and ignore everything else. And he's built Berkshire Hathaway's by doing one thing exceptionally well: capital allocation. Running railroads, factories, insurance companies, that's handled by the operators who are far better at those jobs than he is. Ryan operates the same way. He sells, he brands, and he expands. Everyone else in the room scares him a little bit because they have IP, he doesn't. Ryan isn't in home building. He's not in design. He's not in construction. He's not doing 100 different things. He didn't expand to 100 different cities immediately. He only expands when he has close to $500 to $750 million in volume already in a new market. Whereas most people chase money out of their zone of genius and stretch themselves thin. The best focus on the fewest things they can be world class at, and then they scale those few things. So this principle is very simple, but not easy. Know what you're great at, hire for everything else. And so this next principle goes into exactly how he thinks about growth. And he has a quote: "Sales is our oak tree, and we can go build a forest of those oak trees. I'm probably not going to have similar success rate if I go and make an apple orchard or an orange tree farm. I have oak trees. Those oak trees can have branches, or I can have other oak trees." And he explains this a little further, saying, "I look at my life like a big oak tree, and my tree happens to be real estate." And here's where the key insight comes together. He says, "My oak tree is sales. The bark is real estate because that's what people see. But the oak tree is really sales and sales enablement. How many branches can I have? That's my capacity. The oak tree is sales and not real estate. Real estate is just the bark that people see. Every branch, courses, media, books grows from the same trunk." So he's not going to go start an apple orchard. He's going to grow more oak trees. And so This is actually very similar to Rockefeller, who stacked one advantage on top of another until competitors couldn't catch up. He borrowed heavily to increase production. He used increased volume to negotiate railroad rebates his competitors couldn't get. And then he used those profits to buy his competitors. And then he found income streams. He'd tell competitors to ship through me, I'll get you better rates than you can get alone. And so he'd make money on every barrel his competitors shipped to. And then he used his cap table as a weapon, and he gave Cleveland bankers cheap Standard Oil stock so they would actually loan him and refuse to loan his competitors. And this is kind of similar to what Serhant does. He built everything off the back of sales and let real estate build one massive tree instead of 100 small trees. And so the principle here is grow from strength, don't diversify into weaknesses. And so this next idea goes into how he scales himself. He has a great quote saying, I have a handful of different assistants. One is a CRM, and her name is Sydney. She is my CRM to make sure that she talks like me, writes like me, acts like me. And so she does client engagement all day long so I can buy some of that time back. And he has another quote, I have an email assistant who's been a godsend for me for the last 5 years. Someone who can think like me, write like me, and talk like me. Now, here's the insight. Before you hire someone to be you, figure out how to clone your voice. Sydney isn't just responding to clients, she's responding as him. And the systemization comes before the scale. And so Walt Disney built the same exact principle. He didn't just hire more people. He built Disney University so every new cast member learned to perform the Disney magic before they ever met a guest. These were classroom sessions, backstage learning that codified the Disney look. All of it existed to transmit Walt's voice and values and standards so that thousands of people could deliver a consistent emotional experience as Walt Disney. And that training came before the head count, not after. And so Ryan actually did a very similar thing in a miniature way, that Sydney isn't just an assistant, she's a systemized version of his voice and how he talks and writes and thinks so he can scale his presence without diluting it. Even in his communities, like Serhant, he starts to seed his culture of his brand at Serhant. So the principle you're going to want to write down here is systemize before you hire. And so this next principle actually dives into his framework of how he thinks through growth phases. And so this next idea goes into how he actually thinks about growth phases. And here's his framework. And he has a quote. These are two phases, hardening what you have and building what's next. You can't do both. And he actually describes his approach to this. My near-term focus is moving into appropriate markets throughout the United States and then hardening and building and hardening and building and hardening and building. And so hardening means making what exists bulletproof. Building means adding new capabilities. The key is you alternate. You don't do both simultaneously. You can't strengthen the foundation and add floors at the same time. And so Jeff Bezos explains this as focus on what you won't change before expanding. And so Sam Walton also talks about this when he started with a single Ben Franklin franchise store, and he used it as an apprenticeship to master the fundamentals before he ever tried to scale Walmart. And when he launched Walmart, he expanded in rings, placing new stores within 1 day's drive of his warehouse, filling in towns in between, and only building new infrastructure when the existing system was strained. He delayed big moves until the foundation could handle them. And so Ryan operates the same way, moving into markets, hardening until it's bulletproof, and then building into the next one. He's never trying to strengthen the foundation and add floors at the same time. And so this is why we don't see Ryan expanding into 100 markets at one time. And that's why the principle is strengthen before you expand. And so this next idea is a little counterintuitive. And here's Ryan's quote: "Ignorance is probably one of my superpowers. I don't overanalyze. Analysis is paralysis is one of my biggest fears." And so he explains this logic a little further, saying every ridiculous idea that has a big potential reward, maybe that's the one that makes 7-year-old me awesome. If it's not, I'll fix it really quick. And he also says, I'd rather make mistakes and learn from them really fast than try to get a win here and then really think about the next. And so this really talks about that analysis paralysis is more expensive than a failed experiment. If 7-year-old Ryan is going to be awesome, some of these crazy ideas might be why. And so Mark Zuckerberg actually paints this in his principle, move fast and break things. On Facebook's walls are not just permission to be sloppy, but as a declaration that slowness was more dangerous than mistakes. And we see this early on in Facebook when they shipped features in their early days and watched what users actually did, and then either doubled down or killed them. And the fear wasn't breaking something. The fear was moving too slowly that someone else figured it out first. And Ryan operates in that same way. Every ridiculous idea with a big potential reward gets tested fast because an analysis paralysis costs more than failed experience. And a 7-year-old Ryan is the boss who gets to judge whether the bet was worth it. And we see this in a lot of the greatest founders. Move fast, fail fast, correct faster. And that's why ignorance is superpower. And so this next idea actually goes back to a little bit of what we talked about earlier. And it goes back to there's no plan B. And he has a quote: "It's always going to be Serhant hired or Serhant fired. There's no backing out when your name's on the building." And he explains what this means in this quote, that the reputation is forever set with that one sentence. And so he thinks out of all of his competitors, he probably has the highest reputational standards because it's always going to be Serhant hired or Serhant fired, not X or Y with the company, or Ryan, because Ryan Serhant is the CEO and there's no backing out when the name's on the building. And so his name is on every decision. He's not trying to hide it behind any corporate structure, and personal accountability is baked in. And he has a rule about hiring around this. And he says, pink flags are red flags in disguise. I've gotten close on a handful of different executives this year, and there's just something that doesn't click, and I'd rather not take the risk. Estee Lauder, who we've talked about numerous times right now, it has built her entire cosmetics empire with her name on every jar. And she treated that as a personal promise, not a corporate logo. She showed up days early to new counter openings to train salespeople herself, checked on every detail of placement and presentation, and refused to cut corners on her formulas or packaging because any failure was her failure. And when Saks first carried her line, she actually didn't delegate the launch. She staged it personally, knowing that customers asking for Essaye's lipsticks were asking for her. And actually, Ralph Lauren was built on the same way, that personal brand equals company brand. And so Ryan operates in the same way. And he's always going to say Serhant hired or Serhant fired. And that accountability changes how every decision is made. So put your name on it. It changes how you show up. And so now that we're getting to near the end of his ideas, I want to share something that kind of surprised me. When someone asked him, what's his greatest regret? His answer was, my greatest regret, I never asked for enough. And so I kind of want you to think about that. This is a guy who's doing $6.5 billion in sales, and his regret is he didn't ask for more. And he actually calls it a bonus for a regret that I wish I hadn't made my entire life. I never asked for enough. And then he does something that's very Ryan. He turns it into a call to action, and he says, go subscribe to my podcasts. If you enjoy books, pre-orders are available, and you know what to do. And so the ceiling is self-imposed. Whatever you think you can ask for, you probably are underselling yourself. And Henry Ford has a great quote on this. Whether you think you can or you think you can't, you're right. And S.A. Lauder always asked for the best placement and never settled. And so the principle here is the only limits you have are the ones that you accept. And so this idea might be the most important one. And here's Ryan's quote on it. I'd rather regret the things that I did than the things that I have never tried. And he actually illustrates this in the most Ryan way possible when he says, I'd rather ask out that girl and have her say no than live the rest of my life wondering, oh my gosh, she could have said yes. What's the worst that can happen? She's going to punch me in the face? I don't think so. And if she did, then it's an even better story. And I asked out this chick and she punched me in the face. That's crazy. What a great story. That's my third book. This next quote actually came from his dad. He says, he would always say, I'd rather you regret the things that you did than the things you never tried. And that plays a huge role in my DNA today. And this isn't just some positive thinking. This is actually risk calculation. Regret of an action compounds. Regret of action fades. And Jeff Bezos actually thinks exactly like this. And he has a framework called regret minimization framework. It's the same philosophy. Jeff Bezos was 30, making great money at a prestigious hedge fund. And when he had the idea to start an online bookstore to decide whether to quit, he invented what he called the regret minimization framework. Project yourself to 80 and ask which choice leaves fewer regrets. And he realized he'd never regret trying and failing, but he'd be haunted forever if he'd never taken the shot. And so he quit. He moved to Seattle. He started Amazon in his garage, and the rest is history. And Ryan's dad gave him the same exact principle. Regret of an action compounds, regret of action fades. So when you're 80 years old, looking back, what will you regret more? The thing you tried that didn't work, or the things you never tried at all? And he actually sums this up by saying, there's a whole chapter just on the power of yes. Everything that I've done, there's no book for it. There's no structure for success. And he sums this up with a quote saying, there's a whole chapter just on the power of yes. Everything that I've done, there's no book for it. There's no structure for success. The regret of inaction is heavier than the regret of failure. And so that's all 46 ideas of exactly how Ryan Serhant works, but I want to leave you with one more thing that he says because I think it captures everything. I'd rather regret the things that I tried than the things that I never did. And so that's the guy who started in real estate the day Lehman Brothers collapsed. The guy who flew to Shanghai on 18 hours of notice, got stranded on a golf course at 6 a.m. with a dead phone. The guy who scraped together $400 for Ryanair flight to Paris to chase a client who turned out to be worth billions. The guy who said, my only plan B is me. And so if you want to go deeper, I highly recommend his books, Sell Like Serhant. That's exactly his sales manual and how he closes. Big Money Energy, that's the confidence manual and how he thinks about his identity and his energy. And then Brand It Like Serhant is his awareness manual on how he built his media machine. And then also Owning Manhattan on Netflix, you'll see every single one of these principles in action. It's basically a case study in real time. But here's the thing that kind of keeps nagging at me. Ryan didn't succeed despite being a failed actor. He actually succeeded because of it. The rejection training that made real estate feel easy, the improv skills that became his sales methodology, the ability to play a confident character until he actually became confident, the theatrical experience that taught him storytelling is selling. So every failure in his past was actually preparation for what came next. So here's the question I'll leave you with. What's the thing in your past that you think disqualifies you? The weird career detour, the industry you wasted time in, the skill that doesn't seem relevant, because that might just be exactly what makes you dangerous. And I'll see you in the next one.